Mom and Dad texted me they needed a break just 1 hour before my name was called. I believed them until Instagram showed me they were sipping cocktails by a pool instead. I thought them missing the ceremony was the worst part, but the real knife was the financial papers they had been hiding for years. That night, instead of crying, I realized it was time for me to decide exactly what gets displayed. My name is Claire Donovan. At 22 years old, standing in the center of a cramped efficiency apartment in Oak Ridge, Montana, I had become an expert at managing expectations, mostly my own. The morning of my graduation from Westbridge University did not begin with the smell of pancakes or the chaotic, happy noise of a family fighting over who would use the shower first. It began with the gray, persistent drizzle of a late May rainstorm tapping against the single window pane above my bed. The room smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee grounds and the musty scent of old drywall that never quite dried out in this part of town. I stood before a warped, full-length mirror, holding a travel-sized iron I had bought from a thrift store my freshman year. Steam hissed softly as I pressed the wrinkles out of my black polyester gown. The fabric was cheap and unyielding, much like the last 4 years of my life had felt. I was meticulous. I ironed the pleats until they were razor sharp. I adjusted the gold honor cord around my neck, making sure it laid perfectly flat against my collarbone. I pinned my cap into place, checking the angle 3 times. There was no one else in the room to tell me if it was crooked. There was no mother to fuss over my hair, or father to awkwardly pat my shoulder and tell me I looked grown up. There was just the hum of the mini-fridge and the sound of tires hissing on the wet pavement outside. I checked my phone for the 10th time that hour. It sat on the counter, silent and dark. I told myself it was fine. They were driving from Riverton. It was a long drive. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe they wanted to surprise me at the venue. I grabbed my umbrella, locked the door behind me, and walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. Riding the public bus to your own college graduation is a specific kind of lonely. The bus was mostly empty at 9 in the morning, save for a tired nurse ending a night shift and a man clutching a damp grocery bag. Outside the window, I watched cars passing us, SUVs filled with balloons, sedans packed with parents and grandparents, younger siblings pressing their faces against the glass. I could see the silhouettes of fathers driving and mothers turning around to speak to the graduate in the back seat. I tightened my grip on the plastic handle of my bag, looking away. When I arrived at the Westbridge Arena, the air was thick with humidity and excitement. It was a sea of black robes and bright bouquets. The noise was overwhelming, a cacophony of laughter, shouts of recognition, and the tuning of the brass band near the stage. I navigated the crowd alone, keeping my head down, moving toward the check-in table. That was when the phone in my hand finally buzzed. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, causing a bottleneck of people to flow around me like water around a stone. I unlocked the screen, expecting a "We are here," or "Parking is a nightmare. Save us seats." Instead, there was a single text message from my mother. "Lydia, we're exhausted and really need a break today. You'll understand. We're so proud of you, though." I stared at the words. The blue bubble seemed to mock me. Exhausted. Need a break. I read it again, and a 3rd time. My brain, trained in psychology, immediately began the work of defense and rationalization. Of course they were tired. Dad had been working long hours at the bank. Mom put so much energy into her blog and keeping up appearances. And Jackson, my younger brother, was high maintenance. Maybe something happened with Jackson. Maybe he was sick. They wouldn't miss this unless they absolutely had to. It was a valid reason. They needed a break. Mental health is important. I had written papers on this. I needed to be the mature one, the understanding one. "You okay, Claire?" I looked up, blinking. It was Sarah, a girl from my abnormal psychology seminar. She was holding a massive bouquet of red roses, and her father was standing right behind her, beaming, holding a camcorder. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding thin and brittle. "Just nervous." "Where are your parents sitting?" Sarah asked, scanning the upper levels of the arena. "My dad wants to know if there's room near them so he can get a better angle for the stage." The question felt like a physical blow to the stomach. It was a simple, innocent question. The kind people ask when they assume the world works a certain way. They assume that if you are graduating with honors, someone must be there to witness it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a shape that resembled a smile. "Oh, they couldn't make it," I said. "Last-minute emergency. It's fine." "Oh no," Sarah said, her face falling. "I'm so sorry, Claire." "It's really fine," I repeated, the lie tasting like ash. "They're proud. That's what matters." I moved away before she could ask anything else, merging into the line of graduates processing into the main hall. The ceremony itself was a blur of pomp and circumstance that felt entirely hollow. I sat in my assigned seat, row 14, seat B. To my left, a guy named Mark was waving frantically at a group of people in the mezzanine. To my right, a girl was FaceTiming her grandmother who was too sick to travel. I looked at the section where the parents were seated. It was a tapestry of proud faces. I saw fathers wiping tears. I saw mothers holding up signs with glitter glue that read, "We love you, and you did it." I scanned the rows, uncontrollably, searching for a face that I knew wasn't there. I looked for my father's graying temples or my mother's perfectly highlighted blonde hair. I looked for Jackson's bored slouch. There was nothing, just empty space in the universe where my family was supposed to be. The dean of the college stepped up to the podium. The microphone screeched slightly before settling into a deep hum. He gave a speech about resilience, about the future, about the village it takes to raise a child. Every word felt like it was stripping away another layer of my skin. Then came the moment I had been dreading. "Graduates," the dean boomed, his voice echoing off the rafters. "Please stand up." We stood. The rustle of hundreds of synthetic gowns sounded like a sudden gust of wind. "Now," he continued, smiling benevolently, "turn around and face the audience. Wave to the people who got you here, the parents, the guardians, the siblings who sacrificed to help you achieve this dream. Let's give them a round of applause to preserve this memory for a lifetime." The room erupted. The applause was deafening. Flashes from cameras popped like fireworks. Beside me, Mark was shouting, "Thanks, Mom! I love you!" I turned around because I had to. If I didn't, I would look insane. I turned and faced the wall of cheering strangers. I clapped my hands together. The sound lost in the roar. I smiled at no one. I waved at the empty air. The joy in the room was palpable, a physical weight pressing against my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I felt like I was drowning in their happiness. The isolation wasn't just silence. It was a screaming void in the middle of a celebration. I sat down the second we were allowed to. My hands were shaking. I placed them in my lap. Gripping my phone, it was a reflex, a desperate need for distraction, a need to find something, anything, to anchor me. I unlocked the screen again. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. I thought, maybe Mom posted a tribute. Even if they weren't here, surely she would post one of those long, emotional captions she loved so much. "So sad we couldn't be there. But look at our brilliant daughter." It would be something. It would be public proof that I existed to them. I tapped the icon. The feed refreshed. The first image that loaded was not a tribute. It was not a picture of me. It was a selfie. The location tag read, "Willow Springs Retreat." It was a high-resolution photo, bright and saturated. My mother was wearing her oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. My father was shirtless, leaning back on a lounge chair with a content grin on his face. Between them, Jackson was holding up a glass of sparkling orange juice. The water in the pool behind them was a dazzling, impossible blue. They looked relaxed. They looked happy. They looked like people who didn't have a care in the world. My eyes drifted to the caption. "Finally treating ourselves." It read, "A much-needed escape." There was no mention of Westbridge University, no mention of graduation, no mention of the daughter sitting in a folding chair 2 hours away, surrounded by strangers, waiting for her name to be called. I stared at the photo. I zoomed in on the details, the condensation on the glass, the expensive manicured lawn in the background, the way the sunlight hit my mother's shoulder. They weren't having an emergency. They weren't sick. They weren't suffering. They were at a resort. The shock hit me first. It was a cold, numbing sensation that started at my fingertips and spread to my chest. They chose this. They looked at the calendar, saw the date May 24th, saw Claire's graduation, and they chose Willow Springs. A friend from the row behind me leaned forward and tapped my shoulder, handing me a single sunflower wrapped in plastic. "Hey, you didn't have anyone to give you flowers, so I brought an extra," she whispered kindly. I took the flower. "Thank you," I whispered back. I looked up at the stage. The first names were being called: Anderson, Baker, Collins. I gripped the stem of the sunflower so hard the plastic crinkled loudly. I looked back down at the phone, at the smiling faces of the people who had created me, the people who said they needed a break. The numbness began to recede, replaced by a question that was sharp and cold as a blade. It cut through the excuses, through the years of conditioning, through the good daughter persona I had worn like armor. If they really needed a break, if life was so hard that they had to skip the biggest day of my life to sit by a pool, then why was I the only one who never got to rest? Why was I the only one always working, always studying, always understanding, while they drank mimosas in the sun? My name was about to be called. I sat up straight. I didn't wipe the single tear that escaped. I let it dry on my cheek. I wasn't sad anymore. I was waking up to understand why a picture of 3 people drinking mimosas by a pool felt like a structural collapse in my chest. You have to understand the architecture of the house I grew up in. You have to understand the specific, suffocating geometry of the Donovan family in Riverton. From the sidewalk, our life looked immaculate. We lived in a 2-story colonial on a street lined with oak trees that turned a brilliant, fiery orange in October. My father, Daniel, was the branch manager of the local bank. He was the man who shook hands at the 4th of July parade, the man who knew everyone's mortgage rates and credit scores. My mother, Lydia, was the smiling face behind Lydia's Life, a parenting and lifestyle blog that had garnered a respectable following in the tri-state area. She wrote about intentional living, about creating a sanctuary for your children, about the chaotic beauty of motherhood. But inside that house, the roles were cast with rigid precision, and I was never the protagonist. I was the stagehand. I was the audience. Occasionally, I was the prop. The difference in how we were valued was not something grand or dramatic. It was quiet. It was in the temperature of a washcloth. I remember being 12 years old, shivering under a thin quilt with a fever that made the walls breathe. My throat felt like it was lined with broken glass. I had stumbled into the kitchen to ask for medicine, and my mother had sighed, not with sympathy, but with the irritation of someone whose schedule had been slightly inconvenienced. "Check the cabinet, Claire," she had said, not looking up from her laptop where she was editing a photo of a vase. "Drink some water and go back to bed. Don't make a production out of it." 2 months later, my younger brother, Jackson, caught a mild seasonal cold. The house transformed into a field hospital. The blinds were drawn to protect his eyes from the sun. My father came home early from the bank with specialized electrolyte drinks. My mother spent 3 days making bone broth from scratch because she read it had healing properties. She sat by his bed, stroking his hair, whispering that he was brave, that he would get through this. I stood in the doorway, watching them. I wasn't jealous of the soup. I was confused by the math. I couldn't calculate why his discomfort was a tragedy, while my pain was an annoyance. "You're the strong one, Claire," my father would say when I asked why Jackson got to skip his chores. "You're resilient. Jackson needs a little more support. He feels things deeply." That was the trap. They weaponized my competence. They praised me for being low maintenance until I was afraid to have any needs at all. Being the adult in the room wasn't a compliment. It was a grooming tactic to ensure I never asked for my share of the resources. And the resources were always finite when it came to me, yet miraculously abundant for Jackson. In the 8th grade, there was a class trip to the state capitol. It cost $350. I brought the permission slip home 2 weeks in advance, placing it gently on the granite island in the kitchen. "We just can't do it right now, honey," my dad said, looking at the paper with a practiced frown. "Things are tight at the bank. The economy is shifting. You understand, don't you? You're old enough to get the big picture." I understood. I nodded. I didn't go. I sat in the library during the days my classmates were touring museums, telling everyone I didn't like long bus rides. 3 weeks later, Jackson decided he wanted to play the saxophone. We didn't rent one. My parents bought a brand new alto sax, gleaming gold in a velvet-lined case. It cost $1,200. Then came the private lessons, $60 an hour, twice a week. When I asked about the money, about the tight economy, my mother looked at me with genuine disappointment. "Claire, this is for his development. Music builds neural pathways. We have to invest in his potential. Why are you always keeping score? It's unbecoming." So I stopped keeping score out loud. I started keeping it in a notebook hidden under my mattress. The most insidious part was the public performance. My mother's blog was a masterclass in revisionist history. She would post a photo of our living room, bathed in golden hour light, with a caption that read, "Showing up for your kids is the most important job description I will ever have." In the photo, Jackson would be laughing, holding a board game. I would be in the background, usually blurred, or just my hand visible passing a bowl of popcorn. The reality of those afternoons was that I had likely cooked the popcorn, set up the game, and diffused a tantrum Jackson threw because he was losing. But on the screen, we were the perfect unit. I was the invisible glue holding their image together. Then came the college years, the era of the grandmother's fund. My grandmother on my mother's side had passed away when I was 16. She was a stern woman, but she had a sharp clarity in her eyes when she looked at me. Before she died, she told me she had left something to help with school. "So you have choices," she had wheezed. When acceptance letters came, my parents sat me down at the dining table. The air was somber. "Grandma left a little bit," my father admitted, folding his hands. "But the estate taxes were heavy, Claire, and there were debts she didn't tell us about. There is barely enough in there to cover your textbooks for a few semesters. It's not the windfall she made it sound like." "We will help where we can," my mother added, reaching for my hand. "But you need to learn the value of $1. You'll need to work. It builds character." I believed them. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. He was a banker. Surely he knew the numbers. So I went to Westbridge University, and I worked. I didn't just have a job. I had a second life. I woke up at 5 in the morning to open the campus coffee shop, smelling of burnt espresso and sanitizer before the sun came up. I went to classes until 2. Then I tutored statistics for $15 an hour. On weekends, I waited tables at a diner where the tips were meager and the floors were slick with grease. I calculated every cent. I ate instant oatmeal for dinner 3 nights a week. I skipped spring breaks. I bought clothes from the clearance rack at Goodwill. I lived in a constant state of low-level exhaustion, my body vibrating with caffeine and anxiety. Meanwhile, Jackson started at a community college 2 years later. He didn't work. "He needs to focus on finding his path," my mother told me over the phone when I called to say I couldn't come home for Thanksgiving because I picked up a double shift. "He's taking a heavy course load. We don't want him burning out." "I'm taking 18 credits, Mom," I had said, my voice tight. "Yes, but you handle stress differently," she replied breezily. "Oh, did you see the post I put up about your Dean's List Award? It got 400 likes. Everyone is so impressed with how we raised such a driven daughter." I hung up. I looked at my bank account, which had $42 in it. I looked at the burn mark on my arm from the coffee urn. I was their content. I was their success story. But I was funding the production myself. I learned to make myself small. I learned that if I didn't ask for anything, I couldn't be rejected. If I didn't expect them to show up, I couldn't be disappointed. I became a ghost in my own family, haunting the periphery, making sure the light stayed on but never standing in the spotlight. I convinced myself that this was nobility, that this was what being an adult meant. Suffering in silence was just the price of admission to the family. But sitting in that graduation chair, staring at the photo of them at Willow Springs Retreat, the timeline rearranged itself in my head. I saw the new saxophone. I saw the private tennis camps Jackson went to. I saw the renovation of our kitchen that happened the same semester I had to take out a high-interest student loan because I was short on tuition. I saw the exhaustion they claimed to have, contrasting with the vibrant, sun-soaked energy in the picture. They weren't broke. They weren't tired. They just didn't want to spend their money or their energy on me. For 22 years, I thought I was swimming against a current, trying to be good enough to reach the shore where they were waiting. Now, looking at Jackson's wrist in the photo, seeing the glint of gold that looked painfully familiar, I realized something that turned my sadness into ice. I wasn't swimming against a current. They were the ones holding my head underwater, and they had been doing it since I was a child, all while telling the world how much they loved watching me swim. I sat there in the plastic folding chair, the air in the arena growing stale and hot as the ceremony dragged on. Around me, the buzz of restlessness had started. People were shifting, checking watches, whispering plans for lunch, but I remained frozen, my entire world narrowing down to the 6-inch screen of my phone. The Instagram post was still there. It had not been a hallucination. Willow Springs Retreat. It was a boutique resort about 2 hours north. I knew it because I had looked at their website once during finals week, fantasizing about a massage I could never afford. It was the kind of place that charged $8 for a bottle of water and advertised mindful silence as an amenity. Then, my eyes drifted to Jackson's arm. He was resting his hand on the white tablecloth, holding a fork. The sunlight caught the glint of something gold on his wrist. I stopped breathing. It was a heavy curb-link gold bracelet with a small engraved ID plate. It was unmistakable. It belonged to my grandfather originally, but after he died, my grandmother had worn it every day. When she was in the hospice center, her skin papery and translucent, she had taken it off and placed it in a velvet pouch. "This is for the first one of you to walk across a college stage," she had whispered, her voice rasping with the effort. "It is a symbol, Claire. It means you finished what you started. It means you have the tools to build your own life." She had looked at me when she said it. We both knew Jackson had just failed algebra for the second time in middle school. It was an unspoken covenant between us. Now, that covenant was wrapped around the wrist of a 19-year-old dropout who was currently eating a waffle while I sat alone in a cap and gown. They hadn't just given him the bracelet. They had stolen the moment it was supposed to represent. They had taken a symbol of my hard work and draped it over him like a decoration, rewarding him simply for existing. I didn't cry. Tears would have implied sadness, and I was past sadness. I was entering a new territory entirely. It felt like standing in the wreckage of a car crash, looking at the twisted metal and shattered glass, and realizing with a terrifying clarity that the brake lines had been cut miles ago. This was not an accident. This was a demolition. The ceremony ended. I stood up mechanically when the music swelled. I walked out of the arena, navigating the sea of hugging families. A father bumped into me, apologizing profusely as he rushed to embrace his son. I mumbled that it was okay. I just wanted to get to the exit. I wanted to get to the fresh air. I made it to the bus stop just as the rain began to let up, leaving the pavement slick and black. My phone buzzed in my hand again. I assumed it was another notification from Instagram, another picture of their celebration. I almost didn't look, but the vibration pattern was different. It was 2 short pulses. I lifted the phone. It was an email notification from my credit card company. Transaction alert. Card not present. I frowned. I had a student credit card, a low-limit account I had opened freshman year to build credit. I used it strictly for emergencies, textbooks that financial aid didn't cover, or the occasional urgent prescription. My parents had access to it as authorized users, because when I opened it at 18, my father had insisted it was safer that way. "Just in case you get into trouble and we need to help you pay it off," he had said. I had never gotten into trouble. They had never paid a dime toward it. I opened the email. Merchant, Willow Springs Resort and Spa. Amount, $452.80. I stared at the number. The bus pulled up with a screech of brakes, the doors hissing open. I stepped on, swiping my transit pass with a trembling hand, and collapsed into the first available seat. $450. They hadn't just skipped my graduation to go to a resort. They had paid for their getaway using my credit card. The absurdity of it made me feel lightheaded. I was the one who worked the night shift. I was the one who ate ramen noodles. I was the one who had meticulously paid off every small balance I ever accrued. And they were currently toasting to their much-needed break on a tab that would show up in my mailbox next month. The bus lurched forward, but I was no longer in Oak Ridge. I was deep inside the banking app on my phone, scrolling. I needed to see the history. I had always been casual about checking the statements. I looked at the total, paid it, and moved on. I assumed the charges were mine. I assumed that the $30 here or the $40 there were just things I had forgotten. A coffee run for a study group, a textbook rental, a late-night Uber. I trusted them. They were my parents. The idea that they would skim from me was so foreign, so violative, that it had never even formed as a hypothesis in my mind. Until now. I scrolled back to April. April 12th, Shell Station, Riverton, $65. I wasn't in Riverton in April. I was on campus, studying for midterms. I didn't even have a car. March 3rd, Ticketmaster, $120. I tapped on the transaction details. 2 tickets to a minor league basketball game in the city near our hometown. Jackson loved basketball. February 14th, The Flower Pot, Riverton, $80. Valentine's Day, my father had bought my mother flowers, and he had used my student credit card to do it. The scroll continued, a digital paper trail of petty theft. There were charges for streaming services I didn't use, charges for fast food in Riverton at 2 a.m, Jackson's late-night runs, charges for Amazon purchases that I never received. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was a system. For 4 years, while I was scrubbing tables and shelving books to keep my head above water, they had been treating my credit line as a slush fund. They kept the amount small enough to avoid triggering a fraud alert, small enough that a busy, exhausted student might write them off as her own forgetfulness. They knew I was working 3 jobs. They knew I was stressed about money. And yet, every time they swiped that card, they made a conscious decision that my financial stability was less important than their convenience. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the motion of the bus. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what the money represented. It meant they saw me as a resource. I wasn't a person with dreams and bills and a future to save for. I was an extension of their wallet. I was a backup generator they tapped into whenever they didn't want to use their own power. The bus stopped at my corner. I walked the 3 blocks to my apartment in a daze. The wet pavement soaked through the thin soles of my dress shoes, but I didn't feel the cold. I unlocked my door and stepped into the quiet gloom of my apartment. The smell of stale coffee was still there, greeting me like an old friend. I took off my cap and threw it on the bed. I unzipped the black gown, the cheap polyester rustling in the silence, and let it pool on the floor. I sat down at my small, chipped desk and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated the darkening room. I pulled up the full statements for the last 4 years, downloading them one by one. I needed to see it all. I needed to see the total sum of my invisible contributions to the Donovan household. As the files downloaded, I saw the most recent pending charge again, Willow Springs Resort. They were probably ordering dinner now, maybe steaks, maybe another bottle of wine. To Jackson, they would say, clinking glasses. To our family. I looked at the spreadsheet I was starting to build. The column of numbers was growing longer with every month I opened. A terrifying thought took root in my mind. If they were willing to do this with a credit card that had a $2,000 limit, what had they done with the things I couldn't see? What about the savings bond my aunt sent when I was born? What about the rest of the grandmother's fund? The fund they said was mostly gone due to taxes. I had accepted their word because I was the good daughter. I accepted their version of reality because to question it would have been to accuse them of being monsters. But looking at the screen, looking at the evidence of the gas, the flowers, the basketball tickets, and the resort stay, I realized the monster had been sitting at the dinner table with me my whole life. I wasn't just a daughter they ignored, I was a daughter they were harvesting. I picked up a pen and opened a fresh page in my notebook. I wrote down the date. Then I wrote down a question, the ink pressing hard into the paper. If I dig deeper, what else will I find? I stared at the words. I knew the answer was going to destroy whatever fragile hope I had left of reconciling with them. I knew that once I started this excavation, I couldn't stop. I would have to tear up the foundation of the house I grew up in. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with a new, sharp resolve. I started typing. I wasn't writing a thank you speech anymore. I was building a case file. The glow of my laptop screen was the only source of light in the apartment, casting long, distorted shadows against the peeling beige paint of the walls. It was nearly midnight. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy, humid silence that pressed against the glass. My eyes were burning, gritty from hours of staring at spreadsheets and banking statements, but my mind was vibrating with a cold, electric clarity. I should have been sleeping. I should have been mourning the day that was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, I was sitting cross-legged on my mattress, dissecting the autopsy of my financial life. That was when the notification chimed, a soft, polite ping that cut through the silence. I tabbed over to my university email account. The subject line was bold and formal. Confidential. Recipient selection. The Chancellor's Honor for Resilient Leadership. I clicked it open, my hand hovering over the trackpad. Dear Miss Donovan, it is with great pride that we inform you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Chancellor's Honor. This award is given to a single graduating senior who has demonstrated exceptional fortitude, ethical leadership, and academic excellence in the face of significant personal adversity. The award will be presented at a private luncheon ceremony on May 28th. We invite you to deliver the keynote address to our distinguished donors, faculty, and press partners. I read the words twice, 3 times. Any other student would have felt a surge of euphoria. They would have screamed. They would have called their parents immediately, weeping with joy, imagining the framed certificate on the wall. It was the highest honor the university could bestow, a recognition that opened doors to elite graduate programs and job offers. But I did not feel joy. I did not feel pride. I felt a sudden cynical lurch in my stomach. My first thought was not about the honor. It was about them. They will come to this. The realization was instant and absolute. My parents had skipped the general commencement because it was crowded, hot, and anonymous. Sitting in a bleacher with 5,000 other families didn't offer them any social currency. But this? A private luncheon? A Chancellor's Award? Donors and press? This was catnip for narcissists. I could already see the script writing itself in my mother's head. She would wear her best navy dress. My father would wear his tie with the gold assertiveness stripes. They would stand beside me, beaming, accepting congratulations from the university president. I could see the blog post my mother would write the next morning. We raised a leader. The title would read, Behind every resilient child is a family who supported them through the storm. She would twist the narrative until my resilience became a testament to her parenting, rather than a survival mechanism I developed to endure it. They would take this award, polished and heavy, and place it on their mantle next to Jackson's participation trophies, using my success to validate their own image. I leaned back against the cold wall, closing my eyes. The anger that had been simmering since the bus ride was starting to cool into something harder, something sharper. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from the deep recesses of my mind. It was a memory of the smell of antiseptic and dried lavender. I was 16. I was sitting by my grandmother's hospital bed in Riverton. The machines were beeping a slow, rhythmic cadence. She had gripped my hand with surprising strength, her fingers bony and cold. I am not leaving you nothing, Claire, she had whispered. Her voice was thin, like wind through dry leaves. I know how they are. I know how they spend. Money burns a hole in your father's pocket, and your mother uses it to buy admiration. It's okay, Grandma, I had said, trying to soothe her. I don't need anything. You will, she had snapped, her eyes suddenly fierce. You will need a way out. I set it up, a trust, for education. But there are rules. I made sure there were rules. So you never have to beg anyone to show up for you. After she died. That conversation had been buried under the avalanche of grief and the subsequent financial talks with my parents. They had told me the estate was a mess. They told me the taxes were crippling. They told me there was barely enough left to cover a few semesters of books, and I had simply nodded, grateful for whatever scraps remained. I made sure there were rules. I opened my eyes. The blue light of the laptop screen seemed to pulse in the dark. I had always been a hoarder of digital documents. It was a habit born of anxiety, the need to have a backup of a backup. When my grandmother's house was being cleared out, I had scanned a box of her personal papers before my mother threw them into the recycling bin. I had never really looked at them. I just saved them to an external hard drive, labeled Grandma, and forgot about them. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the drive. I plugged it in. The folder opened. Wills and Deeds. Scanned August 2019. I opened the PDF. It was a dense, 30-page document, full of legal jargon that made my eyes swim. I scrolled past the distribution of furniture, the jewelry, the house, and then I found it. It was a subsection on page 12, highlighted in the scan because the paper itself had been dog-eared. Educational Trust Fund. I read the clause, then I read it again, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs, louder than the rain had been. The primary beneficiary, Claire Elizabeth Donovan, shall receive access to the principal amount for educational purposes. The appointed trustees, Daniel and Lydia Donovan, are authorized to withdraw funds solely for tuition, room, board, and direct educational expenses of the beneficiary. That was standard. That was what they had told me. But then came the paragraph they had never mentioned. In the event that the trustees are found to have utilized funds for non-educational purposes, or for the benefit of any party other than the beneficiary, the trust shall be considered in breach. Upon the beneficiary's graduation from an accredited 4-year university, or upon reaching the age of 23, whichever comes first, the beneficiary shall gain the right to demand a full accounting. If misuse is proven, the entirety of the remaining estate assets, including real property previously held in the General Family Trust, shall transfer immediately to the sole control of the beneficiary as restitution. I sat there, frozen. The legal words danced before my eyes. Upon the beneficiary's graduation. That was today. Technically, legally, the moment I moved my tassel from right to left, the lock on this clause had clicked open. I looked at the date on the document. I looked at the email from the chancellor. The award wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a catalyst. My parents didn't know I had this document. They likely thought the original was buried in a lawyer's archive somewhere, gathering dust, or that I was too naive to ever ask for it. They thought they had successfully drained the account to fund their lifestyle, Jackson's camps, the kitchen renovation, the trips, and that I would just walk away, grateful for the crumbs. But they had made a fatal error. They had underestimated the very thing the university was honoring me for, my resilience, and my ability to read the fine print. The realization washed over me like cold water. The chancellor's honor ceremony wasn't just an opportunity for them to preen, it was a trap. But this time, they were the ones walking into it. They would come. They would have to. If I accepted the award, they would be compelled to appear to maintain the facade of the perfect, supportive family. They would walk into that room, surrounded by the most powerful people at the university, thinking they were the stars of the show. And I would be standing at the podium. I felt a shift in my chest, the heavy, suffocating weight of the betrayal, the image of them at Willow Springs, the stolen credit card, the years of neglect, began to transform. It was no longer a burden I had to carry. It was ammunition. I wasn't a sad, lonely girl in a damp apartment anymore. I was a plaintiff. I reached for my notebook, the same notebook where I had listed the fraudulent charges just an hour ago. I turned to a fresh page. My hand was steady now. The trembling had stopped completely. I wrote a header at the top of the page. The speech. I stared at the blank lines. Usually, these speeches were about gratitude. They were about thanking the people who helped you along the way. They were about platitudes and bright futures. I picked up my pen. This speech will not be a thank you. I thought, the words forming clearly in my mind. It will be an autopsy. I wrote down the first line of my plan. Step 1. Confirm the numbers. Get the official trust ledger from the lawyer before the ceremony. Step 2. Let them come. Let them sit in the front row. Let them smile for the cameras. Step 3. Tell the truth. I looked at the chancellor's email again. Resilient leadership. The irony was perfect. They wanted a story about overcoming adversity? I would give them one. I would tell them exactly where the adversity came from. I would tell them that the hardest thing I ever had to overcome wasn't the coursework or the late nights or the poverty. It was the people who were supposed to protect me. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to be the adult they always praised me for being. I was going to be calm, articulate, and devastatingly precise. I closed the laptop with a soft snap. The screen went black, plunging the room into darkness. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I didn't need it. I sat there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling the presence of the ghost of the girl I used to be, the girl who just wanted them to love her. That girl was gone. She had been left behind at a bus stop in the rain. I reached over and blew out the candle I had lit earlier to mask the smell of the damp room. A thin ribbon of smoke curled up into the invisible air. I picked up my phone one last time. The email notification was still there on the lock screen, glowing like a beacon in the center of a stage. I swiped to accept the invitation. I will be there, I typed. The stage was set, the lights were ready, and for the first time in my life, I was writing the script. The drive to Briarfield took 45 minutes on a highway that cut through the endless, flat farmland of the state. I did not listen to music. I listened to the hum of the engine of the used sedan I had bought with my earnings from the library job. Focusing on the road ahead, I was not going to visit a relative or a friend. I was going to a crime scene investigation. Even if the crime scene was a dusty office filled with mahogany furniture and the smell of old paper. Mr. Harris's law office was tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner. He was a man who belonged to a different era, wearing a suit that seemed slightly too large for his shrinking frame. When I walked in, he looked up over his spectacles, surprised. He had not seen me since the funeral, back when I was just a quiet 16-year-old girl standing in the shadow of her grieving, performative mother. "Claire," he said, rising slowly, "this is unexpected. Your father usually handles the communications regarding the estate." "My father is not here," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used when presenting data sets to my supervisors at work. "And since I have graduated as of yesterday, under the terms of the trust, I am no longer a minor requiring a guardian's oversight. I am here to exercise my right to a full accounting." "Mr. Harris hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. He respected the law, and the law was clear. He gestured for me to sit. He pulled a heavy accordion-style file from a cabinet behind him. "I must warn you," he said, opening the folder. "The fund has been significantly depleted over the last 6 years. Your parents have been very diligent about submitting withdrawal requests for educational support." "I would like to see the ledger," I said, "and the original starting balance." He slid a sheet of paper across the desk. I looked at the number at the top of the column. It was the starting balance from the day my grandmother died. $85,000. The air left the room. For years, my parents had told me there was maybe 5,000 or 6,000 left after taxes. They had watched me work double shifts. They had watched me panic over textbook prices. They had signed the forms for my high-interest student loans, shaking their heads and saying, "If only we had more to help you." $85,000. It was enough to pay for my entire tuition at Westbridge. With money left over for housing, I could have studied without the crushing weight of debt. I could have slept more than 5 hours a night. "Show me where it went," I said. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold forensic curiosity. Mr. Harris turned the page. As you can see, the withdrawals are labeled under Family Educational Support and Enrichment, which is a broad category allowed under the trust's stipulations for the minor. I ran my finger down the list. June, 4 years ago, $2,500. Purpose: Summer Athletic Leadership Camp. That was Jackson's basketball camp, the one in Arizona. September, 3 years ago, $1,800. Purpose: Musical theory and instrument acquisition. Jackson's saxophone. January, 2 years ago, $12,000. Purpose: Home study environment renovation. I stopped at that one. $12,000. That was the exact semester I had to drop a class because I couldn't afford the lab fees. I remembered that winter. My parents had remodeled Jackson's bedroom, knocking down a wall to give him more space, buying him a new ergonomic desk and a gaming chair because he studies better when he is comfortable. They had used my tuition money to renovate their own house for their golden child. I looked up at Mr. Harris. "These expenditures," I said, pointing to the line items. "They are for my brother. The trust specifies the beneficiary is Claire Elizabeth Donovan." Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses, looking uncomfortable. "Your father argued that a stable family environment and the educational success of your sibling contributed to your overall well-being. The clause is interpretative, without a challenge. I had to accept their affidavits." "I am challenging it now," I said. I pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app and showed him the screenshot of the transaction from yesterday. Willow Springs Resort, $452. "This was charged to a credit card in my name yesterday," I said. "While they were supposedly skipping my graduation due to exhaustion, is a spa day considered an educational expense, Ms. Harris?" The lawyer looked at the screen, then back at the ledger. His face hardened. He was a man of procedure, and he did not like being played for a fool. "No," he said quietly, "it is not. The will states that if misuse is proven, the remaining assets transfer to me," I stated. "What is left?" "The liquidity is mostly gone," Harris said, flipping to the back. "There is perhaps $2,000 left in the cash account. However," he pulled out a deed. "The trust still holds the title to the property at 42 Elm Street in Riverton. Your grandmother's old house. Your parents have been using it as collateral for a business loan, but the title remains in the trust until you turn 25, or the trust is dissolved." "They are using it for the homestay business," I realized aloud. Jackson was currently living there, managing it as an Airbnb to learn entrepreneurship. "If I file a motion proving breach of fiduciary duty," Harris said, his tone shifting from defensive to advisory, "the trust dissolves immediately. The title transfers to you. The bank would likely call in the loan your parents took out against it, as they would no longer have the authority to pledge the asset." "Do it," I said. "Prepare the paperwork. I want everything ready to be signed." I left the office with a thick envelope of photocopies. I sat in my car for a long time, not starting the engine. I wasn't just holding paper. I was holding the timeline of a robbery. I drove back to Oak Ridge, heading straight to my job at Northstone Insights. It was a small data analytics firm on the second floor of a converted warehouse. I had started there as an intern, organizing spreadsheets. But my boss, David, had noticed I had a knack for finding patterns in chaotic data. He had offered me a full-time junior analyst position starting next Monday. "Hey, Claire," David said as I walked in. He was standing by the coffee machine. "I thought you'd be taking the day off after graduation. Celebrate a little?" "I function better when I'm working," I said, dropping my bag at my cubicle. I logged into my workstation. The dual monitors flickered to life. I opened a blank spreadsheet, but I didn't open the company's files. I opened the scans I had made of my bank statements and the photos I had taken of Mr. Harris's ledger. I started to build a master timeline. On the left screen, I plotted the trust withdrawals. On the right screen, I plotted my life. Date: October 10th. 3 years ago. Trust withdrawal: $400. Educational supplies. My life: I was eating peanut butter from a jar because I was short on rent. Reality: Jackson posted a photo of new limited edition sneakers on that same date. Date: May 15th, last year. Trust withdrawal: $5,000. Summer enrichment program. My life: I was working the graveyard shift at the library, sleeping 4 hours a day, developing a tremor in my hand from caffeine overdose. Reality: the family went to a lakeside cabin for 2 weeks. I was not invited because I had to work. The correlation was perfect. Every time I struggled, they spent. Every time I sank deeper into exhaustion, they used the life raft my grandmother built for me to keep themselves dry. The credit card charge at Willow Springs wasn't an anomaly. It was the inevitable conclusion of a philosophy they had held for years. I was the fuel, and they were the engine. I worked until the office was empty. The cleaning crew came and went, the vacuum humming in the distance, the sun went down, and the city lights of Oak Ridge flickered on outside the window. I had the data. I had the legal leverage. Now I needed the delivery mechanism. I opened a Word document. The cursor blinked on the white page. Waiting. I wrote a title: Chancellor's Award Acceptance Speech. Draft 1. I started typing the way I thought I was supposed to. I am so honored to be here today. I want to thank the faculty for their support. I want to thank my family, whose love gave me the strength to push through the hard times. I stopped. I looked at the words. They looked like gray sludge. They were polite. They were safe. They were the words of the girl who ironed her own graduation gown and pretended it didn't hurt when her parents didn't show up. If I gave this speech, I would be protecting them one last time. I would be validating their narrative. I would be helping them hide the bodies. I thought about the resilience the award was supposed to honor. Was it resilient to lie? Was it resilient to let people who stole from you clap for you in the front row? I hit the delete key. I held it down until the page was blank again. I closed my eyes and thought about the feeling of the rain on my face at the bus stop. I thought about the smell of the lawyer's office. I thought about the $85,000 that should have bought me peace, but instead bought Jackson a renovated bedroom. I started typing again. This time, I didn't filter. Draft 2. Thank you to the Chancellor and the committee. You have given me an award for resilience, but I think it is important to define what that word actually means in practice. Resilience is not a natural resource. It is a response to neglect. The words poured out of me. I wasn't writing a speech anymore. I was writing an indictment. I wrote about the specific dollar amounts. I wrote about the dates. I wrote about the silence of a phone that didn't ring. I printed both versions. I held them in my hands. The safe version was light, flimsy. The truth version felt heavy, dangerous. I stood up and walked to the shredder in the corner of the office. I fed the safe version into the machine. The blades whirred, slicing the lies into confetti. I went back to my desk and picked up my notebook. I turned to a fresh page and wrote down 4 phrases, underlining them until the pen nearly tore the paper. Conditions: convenient love, invisible child, stolen education. These were the pillars of my house, and on the day of the ceremony, I was going to use them to bring the roof down. I packed my bag. I put the notebook and the Draft 2 speech into my portfolio. I turned off the monitors, leaving the office in darkness. I walked out into the cool night air, feeling a strange, terrifying calm. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin. The venue for the Chancellor's Honor Luncheon was the Westbridge Glass Hall, a structure that felt less like a university building and more like a diamond pressed into the earth. The walls were floor-to-ceiling panes of sheer glass, offering a panoramic view of the manicured campus lawn and the gray, imposing library beyond. It was a space designed for donors, for press releases, and for people who wrote checks with 5 zeros at the end. I arrived 40 minutes early. The coordinator, a frantic woman with a headset and a clipboard named Mrs. Vance, had ushered me into a small, private holding room off the main stage. It was a quiet space with a velvet love seat and a bottle of sparkling water on a silver tray. "Just relax, Claire," she had told me, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "Take a few deep breaths. Big day. Lots of important eyes out there." I didn't need to relax. I wasn't nervous. In the past, public speaking had always terrified me. My hands would shake, my voice would tremble, and I would scan the room desperately for a friendly face, usually my mother's, only to find her looking at her phone or critiquing my posture. But today, my pulse was steady, my hands were still. This was not the jittery anxiety of a student hoping to get a good grade. This was the eerie, absolute calm of a demolition expert who has already set the charges and is simply waiting for the countdown to reach 0. I stood up and walked to the door. It was cracked open just an inch, allowing a sliver of the main hall to come into view. I could hear the murmur of the crowd, the clinking of silverware, and the polite laughter of people making small talk. I adjusted my angle until I saw them. They were sitting in the front row, center, the seats of honor. My mother, Lydia, was wearing a dress I had never seen before. It was a striking, electric blue sheath that hugged her frame, paired with a statement necklace that caught the overhead lights. She wasn't talking to my father. She was holding her phone up at arm's length, the ring light case illuminated, recording a video. I watched her lips move. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the script by heart. She was likely tilting her head just so, putting on her earnest mother face. "Here we are," she would be saying to her followers. "Behind the scenes of my daughter's big day, it takes a village, and we have been there for every step." It was a performance, a masterclass in fiction. Next to her, my father, Daniel, looked less comfortable. He was wearing his best charcoal suit, but he kept tugging at his collar, running a finger between the fabric and his neck as if the air in the room was getting thin. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was scanning the room, his eyes darting toward the tables where the wealthy alumni and local business owners sat. He was calculating. He was wondering who he could network with, who he could impress with the news of his daughter's success. And then there was Jackson. He was slumped in his chair, wearing a suit that was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened. He looked bored. He was scrolling through TikTok, the blue light of his phone illuminating his face. Then he moved his hand to scratch his nose, and I saw it, the gold curb link bracelet, my grandmother's bracelet. It slid down his wrist, catching the light. I stared at it. It didn't hurt me anymore. It just sharpened my focus. It was the visual evidence of everything I was about to say. It was the physical manifestation of the theft. I pulled back from the door and took out my own phone. I opened my message thread with Maya, my best friend, who was sitting somewhere in the back rows with the general student invitees. I typed a single message. "If the speech goes the way I think it will, please keep the camera rolling. Do not stop." 3 seconds later, a reply bubbled up. "I have 3 battery packs and a front row view of the carnage. I love you. Burn it down." I put the phone away just as the door swung open. It was Mrs. Vance again, looking flushed. "Okay, Claire, we are about 5 minutes out," she said breathlessly. "Just a heads up, after the speech, the chancellor wants a photo op with you and your family right by the podium. Then the local news station wants a quick interview with your parents about raising a high achiever. Standard fluff piece, but good for the university's image." "A photo op," I repeated, my voice flat. "And an interview." "Yes, your parents are already prepped. They seem lovely. By the way, your mom was just telling me how hard you worked for this." "I bet she was," I said. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They were planning to maximize this. They were going to squeeze every ounce of social capital out of this afternoon. The photo would go on the blog. The interview would go on the bank's newsletter. They were building a monument to themselves on a foundation they had actively tried to sabotage. "Why don't you come out to the wing?" Mrs. Vance suggested. "Your parents wanted to give you a quick hug before you go on." I followed her out of the holding room and into the wings of the stage. The lights were dim here, but I could see my family standing in a small cluster near the curtain, waiting for me. When they saw me, the transformation was instant. My mother's face lit up with a beaming, radiant smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father puffed out his chest. "Claire!" my mother exclaimed, rushing forward to grab my hands. She leaned in, careful not to smudge her makeup or mine. "You look beautiful. Honey, that blazer is perfect. Professional but feminine." "We're so proud of you, kiddo," my father said, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "This is a big deal. The chancellor was just telling me about the stipend that comes with this award. That's fantastic news." Of course, he knew about the money. I stood there, letting them touch me, letting them perform their affection. I waited. I gave them one last, silent chance. I waited for one of them to say, "We are so sorry we missed Tuesday." I waited for one of them to say, "We shouldn't have gone to Willow Springs." I waited for one of them to say, "We should not have used your credit card." But there was nothing, just the hollow echo of their own self-interest. "Where is Jackson?" I asked, looking past them. "Oh, he's saving our seats," Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. "He's a little tired. He's been working so hard on the homestay business. You know how stressful that is." "Right," I said. "The homestay, the one in my house." "Okay, places everyone," Mrs. Vance whispered loudly. "Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, back to your seats. Please, Claire, stand by the stairs." "Knock 'em dead, sweetie," my dad said, winking. "Remember, smile. It makes you look more approachable." They turned and walked away, slipping back through the curtain to take their places in the front row. I watched their backs. I watched my mother smooth her dress. I watched my father check his watch. They looked so confident. They looked like they were sitting in a theater waiting for a play they had written, directed, and produced. They had no idea that the script had been changed. "From the speakers," the voice of the chancellor boomed out, rich and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, faculty, and students, we are here today to honor a student who exemplifies the very best of Westbridge University. The Chancellor's honor for resilient leadership is not given lightly. It is awarded to a student who has faced challenges with grace, who has led with integrity, and who has succeeded despite significant obstacles." The room went quiet. The silence was heavy and expectant. "Please welcome," the Chancellor continued, "our recipient, Ms. Claire Donovan." The applause started. It was polite, rhythmic, and growing louder. I took a breath. It wasn't a shaky breath. It was deep and filling. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. The spotlight hit me instantly. It was blindingly white, erasing the peripheral vision, focusing the entire world onto the 5 square feet where I stood. I walked to the podium. It was clear acrylic, modern and sleek. I placed my folder on the surface. I didn't open it immediately. I looked out into the darkness beyond the lights. My eyes adjusted, and I saw them. They were sitting right there, 10 feet away. My mother had her phone out again, recording. My father was leaning forward, a proud grin plastered on his face. Jackson was looking up, finally paying attention. They were waiting for the gratitude. They were waiting for me to thank them. They were waiting for their return on investment. I looked at the donors in the 2nd row. I looked at the journalists with their notepads in the 3rd row. I looked at the red recording light on the camera at the back of the room. I felt a sudden, profound sense of liberation. For 22 years, I had been protecting their image. I had hidden the neglect. I had hidden the financial abuse. I had hidden the loneliness. I had been their co-conspirator in the lie of the perfect family. But the contract was void. They had broken it when they swiped my card at a resort while I walked across a stage alone. I opened the folder. The page lay flat. The words I had written the night before, draft 2, stared back at me in bold, black ink. I gripped the sides of the podium. The acrylic was cool under my palms. I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," I said. My voice was clear, amplified, ringing through the glass hall. Thank you to the Chancellor, to the faculty, and to everyone here today. I paused. I let the silence stretch for a beat longer than was comfortable. I saw my mother's smile falter slightly, just a twitch at the corner of her mouth. I am done being your quiet investment, I thought, the words echoing in my skull like a mantra. I looked directly at my parents. I locked eyes with my father. And then, I began. First, I want to thank the faculty of the psychology department, I began, my voice steady and measured. Dr. Eris, thank you for teaching me that behavior is a language, and that sometimes, what people do not say is far louder than what they do. To my peers, thank you for the late nights in the library. To the donors here today, thank you for believing that education is an investment worth making. I paused. It was the perfect, polite opening. I saw Mrs. Vance in the wings give a satisfied nod. In the front row, my mother, Lydia, widened her smile, shifting her phone slightly to get a better angle of my face. My father, Daniel, unbuttoned his suit jacket, looking relaxed, looking like a man who was about to receive credit for a masterpiece he did not paint. I looked down at my notes. Then I looked up, locking eyes with the camera lens at the back of the room. But today, I said, dropping my volume just slightly so the room had to lean in to hear me, I do not want to talk about the winners who had a cheering section. I want to talk about the students who cross finish lines alone. The air in the room changed instantly. The polite clinking of silverware stopped. The smile on my mother's face froze, not yet falling, but losing its warmth. We love to use the word resilient, I continued, my hands gripping the sides of the podium. We pin it on children like a badge of honor, especially the eldest children. We tell them they are so mature. We tell them they are so low maintenance. We tell them they are strong. But often, we use that label as a permission slip. We label one child strong so that the adults in the room are allowed to be weak. I saw a woman in the third row, a donor with silver hair, tilt her head. She was listening. I have learned a lot about the psychology of families in my time here, I said. I have learned about the difference between presence and performance. There are families who show up for the difficult moments, the fevers, the failures, the empty bank accounts, and then there are families who only appear when there is a spotlight, families who treat their children like content for a blog post, families who believe that love is something you edit, filter, and upload. My mother lowered her phone. Her face was draining of color. She looked at my father, but he was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. We live in a culture that celebrates the picture-perfect moment, I said, my voice gaining strength. But the picture does not show you who paid for the frame. It does not show you the daughter who worked 3 jobs, as a waitress, a tutor, and a librarian, while her sibling was given private lessons and expensive camps because he was deemed too fragile to work. I did not look at Jackson, but I felt his movement. He shifted in his seat, the leather creaking in the silence. We tell students that if they work hard, they will be supported, but that is not always true. Sometimes, you work hard, and the people who are supposed to protect your future treat your bank account like their personal slush fund. A murmur rippled through the room. It was the sound of uncomfortable recognition. 2 days ago, I graduated in the main arena, I said. I looked for my parents in the stands. They were not there. They sent a text message saying they were exhausted. They said they needed a break. I leaned forward. This was the point of no return. I believed them, I said. I worried about them, until I received a notification on my phone, at the exact moment I was walking across the stage to receive my diploma. My student credit card, the one I pay off with money I earn from scrubbing tables, was being charged $452 at a luxury resort called Willow Springs. The silence in the glass hall was absolute. It was a vacuum. No one breathed. No one moved. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. They were not sick, I said, my voice cold and clear. They were drinking champagne, and they decided that I should be the one to pay for the celebration of their absence. I saw the journalists in the third row frantically typing. I saw the chancellor's eyes widen, I saw the camera at the back of the room zoom in. "This is not an isolated incident," I said. "It is a pattern. It is the tuition money spent on a kitchen renovation. It is the savings bond cashed out for a sibling's hobby. It is the systemic theft of a future, justified by the lie that one child owes the family her survival, while the other child is owed the world." My father started to stand up. He looked red, furious, his hands shaking, but he couldn't move. To leave now would be an admission of guilt. He sank back down, looking like a man trapped in a burning building. "So," I said, looking down at the heavy crystal award sitting on the table next to the podium, "this award is for resilient leadership." I picked it up. It was heavy. It caught the light, fracturing it into rainbows. "This award is not for my family," I declared. "It is not for the people sitting in the front row who are hoping to take a photo with it to prove they are good parents. It is not for the blog. It is not for the reputation." I set it back down with a sharp thud. "This award is for every student whose education was funded by their own exhaustion. While someone else took the credit and the money, this is for the students who ironed their own gowns. This is for the students who know that the price of their parents' love is a debt they can never pay off." Suddenly, a chair scraped violently against the floor. Jackson stood up. His face was ghostly pale, his eyes wide with a mix of humiliation and rage. He looked at me, then at the sea of people staring at him. He looked down at the gold bracelet on his wrist, the evidence I hadn't even needed to point out because his reaction did it for me. "You are crazy," he shouted, his voice cracked, high and desperate. "You are just jealous. You always have to ruin everything." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and shoved his way past my father's knees, stumbling into the aisle. He ran toward the double doors at the back of the hall. The sound of the doors slamming shut echoed like a gunshot. My mother was weeping now, but it wasn't the pretty, photogenic crying she usually did. Her face was buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the realization that the internet she loved so much was about to tear her apart. I did not watch Jackson leave. I kept my eyes on the audience. "I am done," I said. "I am done being the quiet investment. I am done being the invisible support beam that holds up a house I am not allowed to live in." I closed the folder containing my speech. "To the ones who were told they were so mature while being slowly drained," I said, my voice soft now, intimate, speaking to the invisible army of kids like me. "You are not invisible tonight. We see you." I stepped back from the podium. For 3 seconds, there was nothing. The room was stunned. The shock hung in the air like smoke. Then, slowly, the silver-haired donor in the third row stood up. She did not look at my parents. She looked at me, and she began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause. Then a student at the back stood up. Then Dr. Aris. The applause swelled. It wasn't the polite, mindless clapping of a ceremony. It was jagged. It was fierce. It was the sound of people who had just witnessed something true. My father sat frozen in his chair, staring straight ahead, unable to look at anyone. My mother was trying to hide her face with her clutch. I grabbed my folder. I did not look at them. I walked down the stairs, past the chancellor who looked both terrified and impressed, and walked straight down the center aisle. As I passed the rows of strangers, I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in 22 years, I felt entirely, completely free. The silence that followed my exit from the glass hall did not last long. In the modern world, silence is just the brief inhale before the notification sound. I had barely made it back to my apartment, stripping off the blazer that suddenly felt too heavy. When my phone screen lit up, it was Maya. She hadn't just recorded the speech. She had edited it. She had cut the dead air, zoomed in on my face at the moment I mentioned the credit card charge, and overlaid the text with a simple, brutal clarity. She posted it to TikTok and Instagram with a caption that didn't tag me, but spoke to an army she knew existed. To the students whose families didn't show up for graduation, you are not crazy. You are just unsubscribed. I sat on my couch, my legs tucked under me, and watched the view count tick upward, It started slow, 500 views, then 1,000. But the algorithm is a hungry beast, and it loves a villain. By the time I poured myself a glass of water, the video had 50,000 views. By the time I finished the glass, it had crossed 200,000. The comment section was not the usual cesspool of internet toxicity, it was a confessional booth. User 789 wrote, "My dad took the money my grandpa left me for med school and bought a boat. He named the boat the Legacy. I haven't spoken to him in 6 years." Another user commented, "I worked 2 jobs to pay for my sister's dance classes because my parents said she was the talented one. I'm an engineer now and they still ask me for rent money." And another, "The phrase quiet investment broke me. That is exactly what I was. A bond they cashed in when they got bored." It was overwhelming. I scrolled for an hour, reading story after story of financial abuse, of the glass child phenomenon where one sibling is invisible while the other consumes all the light and oxygen. I realized then that I hadn't just told my story, I had pierced a vein. Then, inevitably, the internet sleuths arrived. I had never mentioned my mother's blog by name. I hadn't doxed my father's bank. But I had mentioned a blog about positive parenting and a local bank manager in a small college town. That was enough breadcrumbs for a digital detective. Within 3 hours, the links were being posted in the comments. Found her. Someone wrote, "The blog is Lydia's life. Go look at the post from yesterday. The hypocrisy is actually insane." I opened my laptop and went to my mother's site. The layout was pastel and airy, featuring a banner image of her laughing in a field of wildflowers. The most recent post was the one she had uploaded yesterday morning from the resort, the photo of them by the pool at Willow Springs. The caption originally read, "Resting and recharging with my favorite people. Parenting is hard work, but moments like this make it worth it." The comments section, which usually held 5 or 6 generic compliments from other bot-like mommy bloggers, was now a war zone. There were 4,000 comments. "Did you pay for those mimosas with your daughter's tuition?" one user asked. "Imagine skipping your child's graduation to take a selfie and calling it parenting work," another wrote. "I used to follow you for advice," a former fan commented. "Now I realize your entire brand is a lie." Unfollowing and blocking. It was a systematic dismantling of the digital shrine she had spent 10 years building. The perfect mother persona she valued more than her actual relationship with me was dissolving pixel by pixel. Then came the fallout for my father. I received a screenshot from a friend who still lived in Riverton. It was from the local Briarfield and Riverton Community Connect Facebook group. Someone had posted a link to the viral video with the caption, "Isn't this Daniel Donovan's daughter? The guy who manages the downtown branch?" The comments underneath were disastrous for a man whose career relied entirely on trust and reputation. "I have a meeting with him next Tuesday to discuss my small business loan." One local business owner wrote, "I think I'm going to cancel. If he manages his own family's finances by stealing from his kid, I don't want him touching my portfolio." "Agreed," another neighbor chimed in. "My husband says he saw him at the country club acting like he owns the place. Now we know who was actually paying the dues." My father loved the bank. He loved the status it gave him. He loved walking through town and having people wave at him. He had traded my financial security for that image. And now, the image was costing him his clients. The irony was so sharp it felt like justice. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a stranger. It was Jackson. I stared at the name on the screen. I hadn't spoken to him since he ran out of the auditorium. I expected an apology. I expected him to say he didn't know about the money, even though I knew he did. I expected some shred of brotherly recognition. I opened the message. It was a wall of text. "I cannot believe you did that," he wrote. "You are actually psycho. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I had friends in that room. Claire, I had people I was trying to impress. You made me look like a charity case." I scrolled down. "Mom is crying in the bathroom. Dad is pacing around saying he's going to sue the school for letting you speak. You ruined everything. We were finally happy. We were finally having a good weekend. And you had to make it all about you. You're so selfish. You've always been jealous that I have a life and you don't. I read it twice. Not a single word about the money. Not a word about the grandmother's bracelet he was wearing. Not a word about the $452 charged to my card. To Jackson, the crime wasn't the theft. The crime was the exposure. He didn't mind living on stolen money, as long as no one turned on the lights. He was angry because I had broken the fourth wall of the play he was starring in. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say to someone who saw me as a prop in his scenery. 10 minutes later, the email from my mother arrived. The subject line was just my name, Claire. I opened it. It was written in the tone she used when she was trying to manage a situation, the tone of a PR crisis manager trying to spin a disaster. Claire, I am writing this because your father is too upset to speak. We are absolutely devastated. Not by your accusations, which were twisted and dramatic, but by your cruelty, to attack your family in public, to ambush us at an award ceremony. It was a calculated act of humiliation. We did the best we could with what we had. You don't understand the pressures of maintaining a household. We used those funds to keep the family afloat, to ensure Jackson had a chance, just like you did. We intended to pay it back eventually. We always do. You could have come to us privately. We could have discussed this at the dinner table like civilized people. Instead, you dragged the entire internet into our private business. You have exposed us to ridicule from strangers who don't know our heart. I hope you are happy with your little moment of fame. You have broken this family apart. Mom. I leaned back in my chair. The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity. We intended to pay it back eventually. It was the lie of every embezzler in history. They wanted a private conversation because private conversations can be controlled. Private conversations can be denied. Private conversations don't have witnesses. By taking it to the stage, by letting the internet see the receipts, I had removed their ability to control the narrative. That was what they couldn't forgive. They weren't mad that they hurt me. They were mad that they couldn't hide it anymore. I hit reply. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to justify the timing. I didn't need to argue about the definition of family support. The ledger Mr. Harris gave me spoke louder than any paragraph I could write. I typed 2 sentences. I kept your secrets for 22 years. One honest speech is nothing compared to what you withdrew from my life and my accounts. I pressed send. Then, I did something I should have done years ago. I went into my phone settings. I blocked my mother. I blocked my father. I blocked Jackson. I set the phone down on the coffee table. The screen was still buzzing with notifications. Strangers calling me a hero. Strangers offering to buy me a graduation dinner. Strangers telling me to run and never look back. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't the empty, hollow silence of the morning. It was a full silence. It was the silence of a space that belonged entirely to me. I looked around the small room. The damp smell was still there. The furniture was still cheap. I still had student loans to pay and a job to start on Monday. But for the first time, every inch of space felt solid. I wasn't waiting for them to call. I wasn't waiting for them to approve. I wasn't waiting for them to come and save me. I had saved myself. I picked up the remote and turned on the TV. Letting the noise of a sitcom fill the room, I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was the author of the story. And I had just written the twist that changed everything. The bridge back to them wasn't just burned. I had blown up the foundation. And looking at the flames from the safety of my own couch, I didn't feel the urge to grab a bucket of water. I just wanted to warm my hands. The meeting at Mr. Harris's office 2 weeks later was not a family reunion. It was a deposition in everything but name. The room smelled of lemon polish and old leather, a scent that usually comforted me, but today it smelled like the sterile air of a courtroom. I arrived 5 minutes early. I wore a charcoal suit, the same one I had worn to my job interview at Northstone Insights. I sat on one side of the mahogany conference table, my hands folded on top of a thick manila folder. Mr. Harris sat at the head, his expression unreadable, a stack of legal documents arranged with geometric precision before him. When my parents walked in, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They looked older, The viral fame had not been kind to them. My father, Daniel, had dark circles under his eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. His usually crisp suit looked slightly loose, as if he had lost weight in a hurry. My mother, Lydia, was not wearing her signature bright colors. She wore a muted beige cardigan, and her hands were devoid of the rings she usually flaunted. She did not look at me. She looked at the floor, then at the window, then at Mr. Harris, anywhere but my face. They sat opposite me. The table was wide, but the distance between us felt like an ocean. "Let us begin," Mr. Harris said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. "We are here to discuss the disposition of the Elizabeth Vance Educational Trust, of which Claire Elizabeth Donovan is the sole beneficiary." My father cleared his throat. He leaned forward, putting on his bank manager face, a mask of reasonable authority that I had seen him wear 1,000 times when denying people loans. "Now look," Daniel started, his voice striving for a jovial, pragmatic tone. "I think we can all agree that things have gotten a little blown out of proportion. The internet is a crazy place, right? But we are still a family, and families share resources, the money in the trust. Yes, technically it was for education, but we viewed education holistically. Investing in Jackson's future, in his stability, was an investment in the family brand. If the family does well, Claire does well. It's all one pot. Really." He looked at me, expecting me to nod, expecting the old Claire, the compliant, quiet daughter, to agree to keep the peace. I did not nod. I did not blink. "It is not one pot," I said. My voice was calm, pitched low. "It was a specific legal entity with specific rules, rules you broke repeatedly for 6 years. "We were going to pay it back," my mother burst out, her voice shrill. "We just needed liquidity to get Jackson's business off the ground. You know he's not like you, Claire. He needs more help. He needs a runway." "I am not here to discuss Jackson's runway," I said. "I am here to discuss the robbery of my runway." I signaled to Mr. Harris. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and picked up the document on top of his stack. "According to Clause 4, Section B of the Last Will and Testament of Elizabeth Vance," Mr. Harris read, his voice monotone, "the trustees are authorized to withdraw funds solely for the educational expenses of the beneficiary. Furthermore, Clause 4, Section D states that upon the beneficiary's graduation, she has the right to an audit. If any funds are found to have been misappropriated for non-educational purposes, the trustees are found in breach of fiduciary duty." He looked up over the paper. "I have reviewed the ledger provided by Ms. Donovan, alongside your own withdrawal records. The purchase of a $12,000 renovation, the payment for a luxury resort stay, and the transfer of funds for a siblings' athletic camps constitute a clear breach. There is no ambiguity here. Daniel, you broke the trust." "So what?" my father snapped, his facade cracking. "The cash is gone. We spent it. Sue us if you want. Claire, we don't have $80,000 sitting in a bank account to write you a check. You can't get blood from a stone." "I know," I said. "I know the cash is gone. I saw the statements. I know you are leveraged to the hilt." "Then what do you want?" he asked, spreading his hands. "An apology? Fine. We are sorry. We made a mistake. Can we go now?" "I don't want an apology," I said. "I want the house." Mr. Harris flipped a page. "The penalty clause," he continued, as if my father hadn't spoken. "In the event of a proven breach, the trustees immediately forfeit control of all remaining trust assets. This includes the real property located at 42 Elm Street, Riverton." The color drained from my father's face so fast it looked like a physical blow. 42 Elm Street, my grandmother's house. "You can't," my mother whispered. "Claire, you can't. That house, that's the business." This was the twist they hadn't seen coming, or rather, the risk they had arrogantly ignored. 2 years ago, they had turned my grandmother's charming Victorian cottage into a boutique homestay. They had spent the trust money renovating it. Jackson was currently living in the guest suite, acting as the manager, collecting the rental income from tourists to fund his lifestyle. It was their retirement plan. It was Jackson's career. But there was more. I pulled the property records this morning, I said, sliding a paper across the table. You took out a commercial equity line of credit against the property value to fund the initial setup. You signed as trustees. But since the trust owns the house, and you are no longer the trustees as of this moment, that loan is now in default of its covenant. I leaned forward. If I exercise my right under the will, the title transfers to me. Today, the bank will see the change in ownership. They will call the loan. You owe the bank $60,000 on that line of credit. Do you have $60,000, Dad? Or will the bank foreclose on the business you built for Jackson? My father stared at the document. His hands were shaking. He knew banking. He knew exactly how fast this domino would fall. If the loan was called, they would go bankrupt. Jackson would be on the street. Their reputation would be further destroyed. Claire, my mother said, her voice trembling with a desperate, cloying sweetness. Baby, please, think about what you are doing. That house, it's full of memories. It's where you grew up playing in the garden. And Jackson, he's finally finding his footing. He loves that homestay. If you take it away, he will have nothing to start with. He's your brother. He had $85,000 of my money to start with, I said. He had a head start that most people only dream of, and he spent it on sneakers and failing business ideas. We can make a deal, my father said hurriedly. We can set up a payment plan. We will pay you back the trust money, $500 a month. We will keep running the homestay, and we will cut you a check. Just don't take the title. $500 a month, I repeated. At that rate, you would pay me back in 14 years, without interest. I opened the folder I had brought. I took out a spreadsheet. It was color-coded. This, I said, pointing to a column of red ink, is the total amount you took from the trust, $85,400. I pointed to a column of blue ink. This is the total amount of debt I had to take on in student loans because you told me there was no money, $40,000. I pointed to a column of black ink, and this is the total number of hours I worked at the diner, the library, and the tutoring center during my 4 years at Westbridge, 2,112 hours. I laid the photo of the brunch at Willow Springs on top of the spreadsheet. You stole 2,000 hours of my life, I said. You stole my sleep. You stole my grades. You stole my peace of mind. You let me scrub floors while you drank champagne. I looked at my mother. You want to talk about memories? My memory of that house is Grandma telling me she wanted me to be safe. She wanted me to be independent. She didn't leave that house to be Jackson's playground. She left it to be my safety net. I placed a new document on the table. It was a transfer of deed, already drafted by Mr. Harris. Here is the offer, I said. My voice was like steel. Option A. I sue you. I file a civil suit for theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. I drag this out in public court. The press is already interested. Imagine what they will do when they see the forensic accounting. You will lose your job at the bank. Dad, Mom, your blog is already dead, but a lawsuit will bury it, and I will still get the house in the end. My father flinched. The threat to his job was the kill shot. He couldn't survive a fraud scandal. Option B, I continued. You sign this paper right now. You transfer the deed of 42 Elm Street to me. You transfer the ownership of the homestay business entity to me. In exchange, I agree not to sue you for the cash repayment of the $85,000 you stole. I absorb the loss of the cash. You walk away with no debt to me, but you walk away with nothing else. But the loan, my father stammered. The bank loan on the house. I will assume the loan, I said. I have a full-time job at Northstone Insights starting Monday. I have run the numbers. The rental income from the homestay covers the loan payments with a 15% margin. I can manage the debt. You cannot. It was a mercy, and it was a conquest. I was offering to clean up their mess, but only if I got to keep the broom. Jackson lives there, my mother whispered. tears streaming down her face. Where will he go? He is an adult, I said. He can get a job, or he can rent a room from me, at market rate, but he is no longer the manager. He is evicted as of the 1st of the month. The silence stretched. My father looked at the deed. He looked at Mr. Harris, hoping for a lifeline, but the lawyer just uncapped a pen and set it down on the paper. It is a generous offer, Daniel, Mr. Harris said softly. More generous than a judge would be. My father looked at my mother. They communicated in a silent exchange of defeat. They had spent years manipulating me, thinking I was soft, thinking I was pliable. They hadn't realized that the pressure they put on me hadn't crushed me. It had turned me into a diamond, hard, sharp, and unbreakable. My father reached for the pen. His hand was heavy, defeated. We need time to move his things, Dad muttered. He has 48 hours, I said. He signed, then he pushed the paper to my mother. She sobbed, a small, pathetic sound, and signed her name below his. They had walked in thinking they could negotiate a truce with a daughter. They were walking out having surrendered their kingdom to a stranger. It's done, I said, pulling the document back toward me. I checked the signatures. They were valid. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say I love you. I didn't offer a hug. Those currencies had been devalued to 0 long ago. Mr. Harris will file these today, I said. I expect the keys on his desk by 5 o'clock. I walked to the door. My mother looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. It was the first time she had ever looked at me and seen someone she couldn't control. Claire, she whispered, what are you going to do? I paused, my hand on the brass doorknob. I am going to do what you never did, I said without looking back. I am going to manage my assets. The fluorescent lights of the notary office hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to drill into the silence of the room. It had been 3 weeks since the confrontation at the lawyer's office, and the atmosphere had shifted from volatile anger to a heavy, suffocating resignation. My parents sat on the other side of the sleek, fake wood table. They looked like ghosts of the people who had posed by the pool at Willow Springs. My mother, Lydia, had lost the glow that usually accompanied her. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wasn't wearing makeup. The viral fallout had been nuclear. Her blog, Lydia's Life, was currently set to private after thousands of comments pointed out the hypocrisy of her intentional parenting. The sponsors had dropped her one by one. My father, Daniel, looked even worse. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the pen in his hand as if it were a weapon. The rumors at the bank had turned into an internal investigation, and while he hadn't been fired yet, he had been placed on administrative leave. And then there was Jackson. He was sitting at the far end of the table, his arms crossed, his leg bouncing up and down in a rhythm of pure, unadulterated rage. He looked tired, too, but it was the exhaustion of a child who had screamed himself hoarse because he didn't get his way. The notary, a brisk woman named Brenda who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, pushed the final stack of documents toward them. I need signatures on the deed transfer, the business entity dissolution, and the waiver of liability, Brenda said, tapping the papers. My father signed first. His hand shook slightly, the scratching of the pen sounding loud in the quiet room. He didn't look at me. He was signing away his retirement plan, his pride, and his control in a series of loop-de-loops. My mother signed next, a single tear leaking out and landing on the paper. She wiped it away quickly, likely habitualized to hiding imperfections, but there was no camera here to filter it out. Then, the papers were slid to Jackson. He had to sign as an officer of the homestay business they had set up in his name. He picked up the pen, held it for a second, and then threw it down on the table. It clattered loudly, rolling toward me. "This is crap," Jackson spat, his voice trembling. "You know that, right? This is absolute crap." "Jackson, just sign it," my father muttered, rubbing his temples. "No!" Jackson turned to me, his eyes burning with entitlement. "You are ruining my life, Claire. You know that? You are ruining my career. I spent 2 years building that homestay. I managed the bookings. I talked to the guests. That was my thing. And you are taking it just because you are jealous. I sat perfectly still, watching him. Jealous? I asked calmly. Yes, jealous. He stood up, looming over the table. You have always been jealous because Mom and Dad actually like hanging out with me. You have always been the boring one, the one with the grades and the rules. So now you have to destroy everything just to get attention. You are selfish. Claire, you are the most selfish person I know. The projection was so strong it was almost impressive. He was parroting the narrative they had fed him his whole life, that my boundaries were attacks, and his needs were rights. Sit down, Jackson, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a weight to it that cut through his tantrum. I'm not ruining your future, I continued, meeting his gaze. I am just finally repossessing mine. I pointed to the papers. Sign them, or don't. If you don't, the lawsuit gets filed tomorrow morning, and your name will be on public record for fraud before you turn 21. Is that the career start you want? Jackson looked at our parents. They didn't defend him. They couldn't. They were out of chips to play. He sat down heavily. He picked up the pen and scribbled his signature aggressively, tearing the paper slightly. Happy? He sneered. Not yet, I said. I looked at his wrist. The gold curb link bracelet was still there, dull under the fluorescent lights. Take it off, I said. Jackson instinctively covered his wrist with his other hand. What? No. Grandma gave this to me. Grandma gave that to the first grandchild to graduate from college, I corrected him. She left it in a velvet pouch with specific instructions. Mom and Dad took it and gave it to you as a prop. It does not belong to you. It's just a bracelet, Jackson shouted. God, you are so petty. You have the house. You have the business. Why do you need this? Because it is the only thing she actually gave me, I said. Put it on the table. He looked at Mom. She closed her eyes and gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. She knew she had no ground to stand on. Jackson let out a groan of frustration. He unclasped the bracelet. He threw it onto the table. It landed with a heavy metallic thud, the sound of a lie finally hitting the floor. I reached out and picked it up. The metal was warm from his skin. I didn't put it on. I slipped it into my pocket. So, my father said, his voice hollow, you got what you wanted? You have the house? I assume you are going to sell it? The market is down, but you could probably get $300,000 for it. Cash out and run? I am not selling it, I said. My mother looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. You're going to keep running the homestay? Maybe we could consult? We know the systems. I am not running the homestay, I said, and I am definitely not hiring you. I picked up the deed, feeling the texture of the paper. I am rebranding, I said. As of next month, 42 Elm Street will no longer be a vacation rental for tourists. I have already filed the paperwork to register it as a nonprofit foundation. I paused, letting the words settle. It will be called the Second Chance House Scholarship, I announced. It will provide free housing and a semester stipend for 2 first-generation college students every year. Specifically, students who have no family support. Students who are working through school alone. My parents stared at me. The color drained from my mother's face completely. You're giving it away? She whispered. To strangers? I am giving it to the people Grandma intended to help, I said. She wanted her legacy to be a safety net. You turned it into a piggy bank. Now, it will be a home for kids who are exactly where I was 4 years ago. Every time you drive past that house in Riverton, you won't see a business you built. You will see a monument to the children you ignored. The horror on their faces was genuine. Losing the money was one thing, but this was a public, permanent statement. Their legacy property was being turned into a shelter for the victims of bad parenting. It was a poetic justice that no amount of money could buy. Brenda the notary stamped the final document with a loud thump. You are all set, she said, standing up. I gathered my papers. I stood up. I felt light, as if gravity had released its hold on me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, white envelope. I slid it across the table toward my parents. "What is this?" my father asked warily. "A copy of my speech," I said, "and a note." He didn't open it, he just stared at it. Inside, handwritten in blue ink, was a single line. "This is the last time you will profit from my story." "Goodbye," I said. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the office, the sound of my heels clicking on the tile floor echoing like a countdown reaching 0. I walked out into the parking lot. The sun was shining, bright and blinding. I got into my car, my own car, paid for with my own money, and tossed the heavy folder onto the passenger seat. Lying on top of the folder was a single silver key, the key to 42 Elm Street. It wasn't a burden anymore. It wasn't a symbol of pain. It was just a key. And now, it belonged to the future scholars who would live there. I started the engine. I wasn't going back to my damp apartment in Oak Ridge. My boxes were already packed in the trunk. I was driving 3 hours east, to the city where Northstone Insights had their headquarters, where a new apartment with big windows and no water damage was waiting for me. I drove onto the highway, merging into traffic. I watched the sign for Riverton disappear in my rearview mirror. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt clean. 3 hours later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment on the 14th floor. The city lights were twinkling below me, a grid of endless possibility. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. I took the gold bracelet out of my pocket and clasped it around my wrist. It fit perfectly. I pulled out my phone. I opened my notes app. I had told my story to the auditorium. I had told it to the lawyer. But I hadn't told it to myself. Not fully. Not until now. I typed the first line, the hook that had been living in my head for weeks. Mom and Dad texted me they needed a break an hour before my name was called on stage. I believed them, until Instagram showed me where they really were. I stopped typing. I looked at the words. What they didn't know is, I was done being theirs. I smiled. I locked the phone and put it down. The story was done. The sequel was mine to write, and for the first time, there were no other characters in the credits. Thank you so much for listening to Claire's story of resilience and reclaiming her life. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop your country or city in the comments below so we can see how far this community reaches. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear these stories of justice. Your support means the world to us.